Hello, and welcome back to the Nats Talk podcast. I am your host, Kevin Nibley, and we are sponsored by Old DC Apparel. Head on over to shopoldDC.com for the latest and greatest in DC fan gear. They have a couple new baseball shirts up. Excited about the team being more competitive this year for sure. And the mayor, Miss Bowser herself, is wearing the hat out at public events. So that's pretty cool. ShopOldDC.com for the newest and coolest DC fan gear. And for the podcast, you can find us on YouTube at Nats Talk Podcast. That's also our handle on X. And if you search Nats Talk Podcast, the audio version is on every major podcast platform. And it is worth saying, we don't do this for a living here. I'm a television editor. I make films. I do things like that. I'm not a professional broadcaster. I'm a fan who does this for fun through the Nats Talk website. So if you are able to hit a like button, hit a subscribe button, give us some love, give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to. If you're listening to the audio version, please do that. It helps us out, helps me out, finding time each week to do this show. So we really appreciate that. All right, so pretty good week in Nats baseball. 4-2 trip out west through Sacramento and Colorado. Would have been nice if maybe they could have picked up that middle game in Colorado, but otherwise have to be happy with the trip. The Nats return home 1 game over 500 and 2 games out of the final wildcard spot as I record this Thursday night. And it just so happens they're going to be playing the team they're chasing. 3 games here in DC this weekend against the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm going to be going to 1, maybe even 2 of those. It's been a while since I could say I've gone to an important series in person. And, it's an interesting time to be a Nats fan because I don't know if I should be getting excited that we're at the beginning of a new contention window where we're going to push in and have some kind of improbable run and we're going to see playoff baseball here in DC in October, or if it was kind of good job, kids, you did okay, but look, the plan has always been to rebuild. We're going to sell Griffin, we're going to sell Garcia, we're going to maybe even sell CJ Abrams. It's hard to know. Maybe the Nats have a great homestand and all of a sudden the learners wake up and remember they own a baseball team and like the object of the game is to win and maybe even win championships. And maybe that makes them go into Taboni's office and say, hey, Paul, go get us a bullpen. I don't know. It's going to be a really interesting couple of weeks. I'm here for it, though. I mean, after the last 6-7 years of rebuilding, here we are. It's almost August and we're in the race. This team could potentially go to playoffs. With that being said, I'm bringing in a guest to talk about that. He is Mike Natelli. He runs one of my favorite Twitter accounts on the Nats. It's called Stars and Strikes. Really thoughtful dude, really smart about baseball. Been wanting to have him on this show for a while, and thankfully the timing worked out. And we're going to get into the trade deadline and also go into the draft a little bit. We went on for quite a while, almost to the level I could break this up into 3 episodes, but I'm not going to do that because we're talking about a lot of trades potentially before they're going to happen. So I will break it up into 2 episodes. We'll be back with him next Friday, and I'm sure that everyone we talked about will have been traded by then, because that's how it goes in the world of podcasting. It's hard to hold an episode for a week, but we'll see what happens there. But anyway, without any further ado, one of my favorite X accounts on the Nats, Stars and Strikes, aka Michael Natelli. Right now, we are joined by Michael Natelli, aka Stars and Strikes on X. Michael, thanks a lot for taking the time today.
Yeah, Kevin, great to be here. I'm glad to be easily a top five Italian Mike associated with the Nationals on this podcast in the last few months. It's a huge, huge privilege.
Now, at the time of this recording, the Nats are 52 and 51, a game and a half out of the wild card. Do you think they're legitimate contenders, or are they just a rebuilding team that kind of happened to catch some luck and hang around?
Yeah, it's funny. I think in a lot of ways they're kind of exactly what they've shown us to be so far, right? There's about four teams ahead of them for the third wild card spot. No team that's really pulled away. I think in a lot of ways they're exactly what we've seen. They are a middle of the pack team. They are probably not good enough to be better than that. They're probably not bad enough to be worse than that. And I think that's what makes how Paul Taboni handles the next week and a half or so interesting is that the gap to clear to try and get to that next echelon is probably a pretty large one.
Hmm.
Um, but they're also definitively better than some of these cellar dweller teams that we've seen so far. So how Paul Taboni chooses to handle that's going to be really interesting because they're pretty solidly middle of the pack.
Now, and yeah, talking about Paul Taboni, as a Nats fan and as an analyst, do you think his objective should be to push in and try to make the playoffs as a wild card this year? Or should he be taking kind of more of like the 1,000 foot view and looking at the bigger picture?
Yeah, I think that this next week is really going to be important because there are, what, 10 games between now and the deadline at the time of
Mhm.
you and I recording this. And a lot can happen in that time, right? If they could go 2-8 in the next 10, and suddenly you're looking at being 7, 8, 9 games out, and that's a pretty tough hill to climb. And so that's where
Mhm.
you start to think about, okay, maybe we're cashing in on Foster Griffin, maybe we're looking to Luis Garcia. If a big offer comes in for CJ Abrams, that's you start to think a little bit bigger in terms of your selling ambitions. If they go 8-2 over the next stretch, I think that also makes things a little bit more interesting in terms of whether you push your chips in. The other thing I think that Nationals fans probably don't think about as much, understandably, but that I think that Saboni and his whole kind of front office are thinking about is what else is happening around them, right? Like we talked
Mhm.
about, there are four other teams that are fighting for that last wild card spot. What happens with them? I mean, I think that if the Pirates go 2-8 over the next week, or the Cardinals go 2-8 over the next week, or the Diamondbacks, who we're going to be playing this weekend, if we can take
Mhm.
all three from them, suddenly the field also starts to thin out a little bit for that. And I think that's another consideration for them as they're sitting there at the table making these discussions and decisions. Do we think that not just can we get one game better than we are right now if they're a game out, it's can we consistently over the next 2 months be better than all four of those clubs and anyone
Mhm.
behind us who gets hot? Or the Phillies if they skid a little bit and someone else jumps into that third or second spot. Can we hang with them? Can we hang with the Cubs if they slide back? There's a lot of other considerations beyond just are we good enough to be one game better? Because it is such a competitive field right now.
Mhm.
And so I think the next week's going to really matter. Now, let's say that all things being equal, the next week goes by and they're roughly where they are right now. I think that they have a really interesting opportunity to do some of both buying and selling. And I think everything that we've read from the people who are plugged into this kind of stuff has kind of suggested that's where they're probably going to go.
Yeah.
Um, whether that's the interesting dynamic with that is that so many of the players that you're thinking about doing that with seem to be really core pieces of what's going on here.
Mhm.
We know that Luis Garcia may not be the 1A or the 1B of this team, but it seems like from everything we've read, he's a pretty core glue guy in that clubhouse. So
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, he's actually a really interesting one of if you are shipping out a Foster Griffin or you are shipping out Dalen Lyle or Jacob Young or CJ Abrams or any of the other names I'm sure we're going to talk
Mhm.
about here, do you want Luis Garcia to be part of that mix, or do you want him to be one of those guys who helps navigate that transition as a bunch of new guys are being swapped in like a hockey style line change in real time, right? That's that's a really interesting thing. Like what message does it send depending on who you send out? And
Yeah.
so there's going to be a lot of interesting discussions and decisions that they're going to have to make over the next week. And I realize that that's a really long way to say I don't know, but I think that there's so many different levers with this thing that we can get into that I think are in a lot of ways more interdependent than I think people think about because of the clubhouse dynamics, the way that the lineup functions right now, especially when you look at the fact that part of why their offense is so effective is what I call good outs, right? When a guy is on
Mhm.
second
Yeah.
base, you still see a lot of guys grounding out a lot, this year, but they're grounding out to get the guy to third and then to drive him in versus, you know, double plays or what have you. So
Mhm.
they've they have a pretty specific way they've built this lineup in a way to maximize those players who maybe aren't as effective. What happens when you start having to reshuffle that lineup? Does that puzzle still work the same way as it did before? Um,
Mhm.
just a lot of different moving pieces that affect each other a lot more than I think people think. Nassim Nunez is another great example of that. Incredible glove. Maybe you add a bat, a Luis Ariz to add some punch at second base, but what does that do for your defensive mix. Luis Ariz has been
Yeah,
an
yeah.
incredible defender this year, but he certainly doesn't have the range of Nunez. And so for a team whose pitching is as bad as this team's, do you want to remove a guy with that kind of range in exchange for a bat? So there's all these different kinds of pieces that you have to think about.
No, absolutely. Do you think there's like a magic number there? Like I know I've been kind of saying like five over or something like that. Do
Yeah.
you think if they're sitting anywhere from five to ten over, probably they probably won't get to 10 over in the next 2 weeks, but let's say
Yep.
they get to five over and maybe and they have like a game lead in the wild card or something like that.
Yeah.
Would that put enough pressure on the front office to at least not sell or maybe do a soft ad? Or do you think that doesn't matter and Taboni's just like, this is year one of his rebuild and he's gonna do it the way he wants?
Yeah, I think that the number of games over 500 will matter less than what the actual wild card picture around them looks
Hmm.
like, right? Because if all the other teams also do that, it in a weird way almost matters less than if they're one game over but they have the third spot, right? They could be five
Hmm.
over and in the fourth spot
Yeah.
jockeying for that spot, and I think that would actually be less convincing to Paul Taboni than if they are two games up but they're actually in the third spot.
Hmm.
I think where that'll actually start to matter a lot more is probably for the controllable guys, right? You're
Hmm.
probably a lot less inclined to trade CJ Abrams, or at a minimum, set the bar way higher if you're in the third wild card spot, right? You're maybe holding a little bit firmer line on a guy like Luis Garcia, who's controllable through next year. But a guy like Foster Griffin, I just don't think it's going to change the approach that much unless
Hmm.
over the next week or so, the entire wild card picture hollows out so much that it almost starts to feel like it's theirs for the taking.
Okay. Yeah. Now, obviously, they have a pretty pronounced weakness. It would be the
Yeah.
pitching and particularly the bullpen. The starting pitching's kind of stabilized as the season's gone on, and even guys like Littell and Michaelis have been at least somewhat effective every once in a while with an opener. But the bullpen's, obviously been a disaster. A lot of Nats fans talk about the series in Philly and against the Yankees, where they blew 6 games late, and if they just even had a few of those back, they would clearly be in a playoff position. You think there's a possibility they add and they go bullpen?
I think that if you see an addition, they might add a less prominent rental reliever like we saw. I hate to bring up 2019 is not this year, and a lot
Sure,
of people
sure.
a lot of people are comparing 2019 to 26. I don't think that's a good comparison.
Hmm.
However, we did see how much it made a difference when they added Daniel Hudson and Rowan Elias and Hunter Strickland to a lesser degree.
Hmm.
Um, it helped because they were so bad that even getting much more, I would say, middle of the road production from Strickland and Elias and those guys, it made a difference because it made it better than it was.
Hmm.
Because the bar was so low that even getting bad bullpen was better than very bad bullpen.
Hmm.
Uh, I could see them doing something like that, but I think that if you do see additions in that form, it's going to be guys who are controllable. They've
Yeah.
Paul Taboni mentioned on a radio hit a few days ago that they've been in on some of the guys who've already moved, and the guys who've already moved have largely been controllable players. Seth Halverson is the one I have a feeling he was probably alluding to, just because he fits the profile of what they want so much. Paul
Hmm.
Taboni's talked about how hard it's been for them to get strike three. Seth Halverson throws 100 miles an hour. It's pretty easy for you to connect those dots. But he went to the Dodgers, obviously, for a couple of prospects the other day. My guess is that they're going to continue to pursue players of that profile. Now, the,
Hmm.
the one that stands out most to me is AJ Bluebaugh. He's a reliever on the Astros. He's 26. He's controllable. He doesn't have the craziest stuff in the world, and his numbers won't blow you off the charts. But he's controllable. He's young, and he comes from an organization that thinks about pitching, I think, in a lot of the similar ways to the Nationals. So they also want outfield, which, by the way, the Nationals have several of that could move. So that strikes me as a one that could potentially fit. Um, I think if they add bullpen, you're probably going to see controllable bullpen. Otherwise, they probably just won't consider it a worth their prospects to dip into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we haven't gotten into it, but obviously there's kind of the specter of a work stoppage next year with the salary
Yeah.
cap and all. Do you think that plays into it where they're going to want controllable guys, not necessarily someone that maybe they have a couple months this year and then who even knows how much of a season next year is? Do you think that plays in?
I think it does. I think on both sides, because I think on the one hand, it probably affects how they see guys with 1.5 years of control, right? That's where you're going to
Hmm.
start pushing for guys at 2.5 or more, because
Hmm.
next year, for all intents and purposes, even though it feels like a year now where they could suddenly expect to be a lot more competitive than any of us probably thought they would be next year going into 2026, we also don't know what the heck next year is going to be. Is it going to be like the COVID year when it's a 60-game sprint? Is it going to be a full
Yeah.
season? Is it going to happen at all? We have no idea. And so I think it's not a situation where you're going to see them want to push in a whole lot of chips on that. On the flip side of that, I think it also makes them a little more. I have a feeling it's probably why you're seeing them so willing to consider, at least entertain CJ Abrams, Luis Garcia, guys like that, who,
Hmm.
Louis has a year and a half left. But if next year doesn't happen,
Right. Yeah.
we don't know how the CBA will handle what that means for service time, right? For all we know, it'll, add that year on to 2028, but it kind of feels like more likely they'll make that year roll, similar to how the COVID year
Mhm.
counted for a full year of service time. Um, and so if you're Paul Taboni, I imagine just knowing how he's talked about this team and being really disciplined in the process and thinking big picture, there's probably a lot more incentive for them, despite how Nationals fans probably want them to think about it, to consider the fact that that year in a lot of ways doesn't mean that much to them right now when you're talking about big picture. And for CJ too, you have 2.5 years left, but in a lot of ways in their minds, it's probably more like a year and a half. And so they're treating him more like how you would treat Luis Garcia this year.
Hmm.
Uh, I imagine. Now, should that be what they do? That's a whole nother conversation, but I think that's probably to some degree how they're thinking about it, both on the buying side and the selling side.
Definitely. Now, I see the sign behind you. Says extend. Very nice. You're the first guest we've ever had who's made like custom artwork for their appearance, so we totally appreciate that. But you're saying extend Foster Griffin. I think a lot of Nats fans would like that, right?
Yeah.
He's probably, with his statistics this year, he's the best pitcher we've had since 2019 level Strasburg or Scherzer, to be honest. But again, we're talking about the bigger picture, the first year of a rebuild. I mean, realistically, you think about selling high on him, and also, what do you think he would bring back? He would be a 2 to 3 month rental for a
Yep.
team looking to trade for him. I mean, what do you think that market would be? What would the Nats have to get to entertain dumping him, and pissing off the fan base?
Yeah, I think those are two separate conversations, right? Like what makes it worth it to the fans and what makes it worth it from a pure baseball economic standpoint are two very separate things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Purely from a trade comp standpoint, I think the most recent comparison that you would make is a guy like Merrill Kelly. Merrill Kelly was much older last year. However,
Hmm.
when you look at the underlying numbers, they were very similar to Foster's, even though Foster Griffin's ERA is much better than Merrill Kelly's was at the time. Kelly fetched three players from the Rangers who were all higher minors prospects. They were all pitchers, which would be nice for the Nationals, but I don't know that they're looking at that exact one for one. They were all sitting somewhere in that, 7 to 15 range of the Rangers organizational prospects. So you're probably looking at 2 to 3 players that are somewhere in that 7th to 15th in the organization rank. But in the higher minors, which I think for the Nationals would be great. The Diamondbacks have already had two of those guys make their debuts this year.
Hmm.
Mitch Bratt and Cole Drake, who just made his debut, have all made or each made, I believe, 1 to 3 starts apiece. And I think the Nationals have more than welcome having two big league ready starters next year who can help the rotation. Um, as far as the extension thing goes, I think it really comes down to whether Foster Griffin is willing to be paid like what the Nationals think he is, rather than what his ERA says he is right now.
Yeah.
Because they're a very model-driven team. They're not going to look at his, I believe it's a 2.86, it's something like that ERA right now, and go, we should pay him like one of the top five left-handed starters in baseball. They're probably going to want to pay him much more like the call it 3.86 FIP, I think is what he has right now, something
I've
like
I've
that.
been seeing like around the internet lately this week. 3 for 45 has kind of been floating. I don't know who
Yeah.
really floated that. I mean, do you think that's? I feel like you might need to go a little higher than that to keep him. But I mean, what would you think would keep him here?
I imagine it would probably be something. He's probably looking at a 4 to 5 year deal. He's probably sitting somewhere in that 15 to $20 million a year
Yeah.
range ish. So you're talking somewhere probably just shy of 5 and 100 is probably what you'd be looking at, or four at that same annual value.
Yeah, that's what I was
Four
like.
for
480,
78,
500, somewhere in
four
there,
for
probably. Yeah.
78 feels about right, or something like
Hmm.
that. Are the Nationals going to hand that out to him? I have no idea. That's probably a tough sell to the Lerner family ahead of a potential lockout, and that's a whole nother conversation. Is the
Yeah,
whole
no, because
the
because
learner of it all, right? So
year one of that, if you do them, for 478, year one of that could be, you're giving them whatever $19 million to sit at home, or,
that's
or you know,
exactly
or
right.
pitch or make a couple
So
starts, right, in a lockout shortened season.
now, as a fan, am I shedding any tears for that? No, but I think so. So I think that's the conversation, though, that for the Nationals you have to have with him, and that's I think what makes it's funny between him and CJ Abrams. There's a two guys who are the prime extension candidates who have a lot of very weird dynamics about what it takes to get them extended.
Mhm.
With Griffin, it's 1 year. He has really good stuff. If you talk to Simon Matthews or someone like that, they'll talk about that, but it's not high velocity or anything like that. So he really needs to have multiple pitches going on any given day to be effective. As he gets older and as the book on him comes out, does that change how effective he can be in year two, year three, year four? All things that you don't know yet. And so the question becomes, do you want to take that money and give it to someone like him, or do you want to take that money if you're even going to spend it and use it on a guy whose makeup, whose profile, and by makeup I mean pitch makeup. We know that
Mhm.
Foster, by all accounts, is a really great guy in the clubhouse and all those things, but on the mound makeup is more conventional in that sense, knowing that this is a team that does favor stuff and velocity and all those more modern things that Foster doesn't have. So that's just a really interesting dynamic. But I think more than likely we'll probably see him moved just because I don't think that that number is going to, those two sides are not going to agree on a number that makes sense for him to not test the market. Um, and the prospect return, especially if a guy like Tarek Skubal isn't moved, will just be
Yeah.
the demand is going to be so high regardless. But guys like Joe Ryan, it's sort of TBD if they're going to be moved. There's a lot of pitchers who may not be out there, which is only going to drive that price up for Griffin. And I think for an organization where Paul Taboni has stated we want to be the envy of sport, not just of baseball, but of sport. He set that bar
Mhm.
pretty high. The farm system is very good. It is not the envy of sport yet, right? It's getting
Mhm.
there, but it's not there yet. And so I think he's going to take every opportunity he can to keep adding to that, to build that.
No, no, definitely. Speaking of another potential sell high candidate, we have Luis Garcia. I was on the record saying moving him to first was an awful idea. I was completely wrong. He's had an amazing season and mostly an amazing June and July. He got, kind of like hotter than the center of the sun for a while. Is he a guy, obviously, you look at the Nats minor leagues, we have like more infield prospects than I can honestly even count. I mean, would he be like a no-brainer sell high candidate, or again, do you think that's going to upset the fans? And and also too, we've mentioned he feels like he's a clubhouse guy. I know every time I've gone and had the opportunity to sit kind of near the Nats dugout, he seems like a guy who's always there, to talk to the younger players, greet them, etc. I mean, where are you with Garcia? Is it a no-brainer sell high, or someone you just want to keep as a glue guy for the team?
Yeah, I don't know that it's a no-brainer. I think that with Garcia, what it comes down to is really how aggressively you sell other pieces.
Mhm.
If this team is selling definitively, they are a deadline seller, then there's no reason not to cash in on what Luis Garcia has become, assuming obviously that you get, return that you feel is reasonable. He is controllable for next year, so there's no reason to get rid of him just for the sake of it.
Mhm.
He's not a rental. But if you do get fair return, I don't see a reason not to cash in. Um, However, if you're doing more of like the swapping out of pieces, if you are buying, then that's where it becomes one where he's probably pretty low on the totem pole of guys you want to swap out, particularly because as good of a heater as he's been on and as good as he is, when you look at what first basemen tend to fetch, especially one like him who is going to be platoon side, I know everyone wanted him to face left-handed
Mhm.
pitching for a while. We've seen him face left-handed pitch for a few weeks now. It hasn't gone very well. Um, I think we've seen that he is still who he was before when it comes to facing left-handed guys. So he's a platoon guy, strong side platoon, but still platoon. When you look at what Josh Naylor fetched at the deadline last year, I think a lot of people were surprised how underwhelming it felt for what the D-backs got back.
Mhm.
Even Eugenio Suarez, who plays a more premium position, he was hitting far more home runs than Garcia was hitting now. Like they didn't get some sort of haul. Now Garcia is controllable
Yep.
next year, but we just don't see corner infield bats that are not long-term controllable third basemen fetch a whole lot. And so it's not that they would get nothing. And, there'd probably be a prospect or two that could really help the organization. But I also think that a lot of people, because of what Garcia has done for the Nationals and the impact that we felt for that, probably value him significantly higher than I think opposing organizations are going to. And so
Yep.
that's another factor to consider is that if the whole thing is it's a no-brainer because we're going to get a top 50 prospect and whatever, like I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be
Yeah.
guys that baseball people, Paul Taboni, Devin Pearson, all those guys are going to be all about. They'll be excited about who they get back. But I don't think that from a fan perspective or from what I call like prospect media, right? MLB pipeline, you're not going to be reading the guys who are number two, number three in an
Mhm.
organization coming back for Garcia. So that's another thing to consider from a fan standpoint is that I think there's probably some of that as well. But to kind of put a pin in it, I think it really is if you're definitively selling, it's a no-brainer. But if you're in this buy sell mode, you probably want him as a glue guy. And if you're going for
Mhm.
it, you probably want one of the anchors of your lineup to stay put.
No, totally. And it's funny. I've been kind of perusing the internet this week. A lot of fans have, they expect Griffin to bring back a couple top 100s. They expect
Yep.
Garcia. I don't, I try not to really reply and say that's crazy, and piss
Yep.
off fans who might actually listen to the show. But, in general, the one guy we do have who I do think would bring back some top 100s in like a quote unquote haul. It wouldn't be quite the Soto haul, but he would bring back some eye-popping names on that list would be CJ Abrams. Where are you on that? I mean, I really think though the fan base might fault if he's
Yep.
traded at this deadline, but he would be a name that could bring back a lot of guys. And again, we have, Seaver King, Willits, Fiend, Fitzgerald, Hakopian. We just got, I mean, we have a
Yep.
million middle infielders, right? What would you do with CJ if Mike Natelli's
Yeah.
running the Nats?
Yeah. I think that we mentioned earlier with Griffin, he was one of two guys where I think the extension conversation is a bit weird with some of the dynamics at play. I think with CJ, the similar thing is that while I don't think he is inherently opposed to signing an extension, I also think that it's pretty clear that the Nationals don't see him as a shortstop long term. I think they were willing to give him a shot. I think he has some improvement this year,
Mhm.
but I think that the thing that's weird about CJ is that even though he has all the range in the world, he's an incredibly athletic player that hasn't really translated into the plus defense you would expect from him at shortstop. And despite all that, though, he's going to want to get paid like one of the best shortstops in the National League, which is what,
Mhm.
regardless of his defense, all the numbers show he is. Um, the Nationals are not going to want to pay him like the top three shortstop in the National League. They want to pay him like a great second baseman, a great third baseman, a great left fielder, a center fielder, whatever they picture him being long term. And while there's still good money to be made in being a left fielder, I would happily take whatever Andrew Benintendi got a few years ago or whatever. It ain't top shortstop money.
Mhm.
And so if you're CJ and that's what you're looking for, it creates a bit of a standoff, right? And now from a fan
Mhm.
standpoint, I understand they don't care. It's not their money. Pay him. But if you're Paul Taboni and you're trying to sell this into to ownership and you're saying that, by the way, I have no idea what CJ would be asking for, but let's call it 200, $300 million over 10 years. Like
Probably. Yeah, I would think in the 25 to 30 range over 8 to 10 years.
it wouldn't be less than 200. I could promise you that.
Oh
Like
no, yeah.
is what he's asking, regardless of whether fans think he's worth that. I promise you it's that the ask is not shy of that.
Yeah, it'd be
Is that
250
something
to 3
is
probably.
that something you want to give your future second baseman, third baseman, left fielder? Like, and fans, yeah, 100%. Why not? But from an ownership standpoint, from a general manager standpoint, especially if there is a salary cap coming and we don't know what that's going to mean, and we don't
Yeah.
know. Some teams have seemingly been anticipating that pre-signed deals will be grandfathered in. Who knows? It seems like this regime, if you want to call them that, has been really optimizing for maximum flexibility going into this new era, whatever it looks like, so that they are as well positioned as possible to do whatever and take advantage of whatever they need to. Um, that said, so that's the hard thing with CJ Abrams extension. I think it's really easy to look at it and go, he's young, he's best buds with James Wood, he's an all-star, he's raking and seemingly now might be on pace to do it for the first time in the second half that we've ever seen.
Hmm.
It's been a week, but he looked pretty good in the Oakland or not Oakland, not Oakland anymore, the A's and the Rockies series, um, especially the Rockies series, one of the best series we've ever seen him have as a national.
Hmm.
Uh, but if there's going to be that chasm there, it's hard for me to see how it gets done, even if I think it should get done. So then you pivot to, okay, what's the plan? And I think that from a purely on-field baseball standpoint, the most compelling version of selling CJ Abrams is that you can get the pitching back that with that pitching and the improved defense from whoever's at short, it probably be Nasim Nunez in the short term, Eli Willits in the long term. On some level of that, with getting a decent bat like Seaver King now in the lineup, is
Hmm.
collectively better for winning on the field than CJ Abrams is.
Yeah.
The challenge with selling that to the fans is they'd say just do both, right? Like go get pitching without giving up CJ Abrams. Go get, a better bat at second base without having to give up your star. Like that's the problem with trying to sell that to a fan base. There's an on-field baseball case for making it, and if you're Paul Taboni and you know that you don't have the money to do it, makes all the sense in the world. But no one cares about that when you send out the Curly W blog about why, you know,
Yeah.
we're so thankful for the contribution CJ made and all that. That is the challenge that Paul Taboni has. What I will respect about him is that going back to when he traded CJ or not CJ, Mackenzie Gore, he's pretty seemingly been willing to wear whatever he has to wear for ownership to do what he has to do to go win games. I think you're going to see that going forward. And I think the comfort you can take is knowing that it seems like he set the bar pretty high. It was probably leaked by the Giants, but we found out over the winter that they did offer a package that was headlined
Mm.
by Yasor Gonzalez, top 30 prospect now. We know that the Nationals love him, some young infielders, so I imagine they valued him pretty highly, and yet they still said no. So it seems like if they're going to move CJ, it's not going to be just to do it. It's certainly not going to be just to get a flashy prospect or two. It's going to be because the guys they're getting, they are pretty excited about. And I think we
Yeah.
saw the same thing with Mackenzie Gore. It was a thing where when he was traded, I will be the first to raise my hand and say, I looked at the trade and I was like,
Hmm.
there were several players that we got that I was mildly excited about, but it was not guys who at the time were talked about in the way that I think prospects you get from Mackenzie Gore should be talked about. We're now looking at it, even ignoring that Mackenzie Gore has not been very effective this year. Even
Mm.
if he was effective, I think we'd be looking at it and be like, all right, you did pretty well. Like we all be pretty happy with Gavin Feene and with Devin Fitzgerald and with even Abby Ortiz has looked fantastic at AAA. And that's to say nothing of the fact that Alejandro Rosario was once
Uh-huh.
a top 50 pitching prospect in the sport. So we're feeling pretty good about it now. And I think that a CJ Abrams trade will probably feel somewhat similar about it, even if the names we get are higher ranked than the ones we got for Gore, because they're going to cast a wide net. They want to add multiple players. They're not just trying to trade him for, I've seen a lot of these mock trades, right? And it's Connolly early and insert the Red Sox second or third ranked prospect here,
Mm.
right? A 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1. I imagine they'd be looking for a 4 or 5-for-1, even if that diminishes the premiumness, if you will, of the top one or two
Yeah.
names. And that's going to make fans not happy. However, I would encourage folks that even though not every trade works out, give it some air to breathe. And like with the Gore trade, you're probably going to start feeling a little better about it, especially because prospects who get traded weirdly have, I don't know why, but they always get a bump, right? The second that Gavin Feene got traded, he became the number 100 prospect on Pipeline.
Hmm.
He hadn't swung a bat because it was December, but for some reason, suddenly he was more well liked. Like there are guys who, when they get traded, it makes prospect people go, oh yeah, maybe there is something here because teams want this guy. So I would say give it a week or two before, if that happens, let it breathe and see where it goes. But it's a tough one with CJ because man, he's just so fun to watch.
All right. So that was our episode. Thanks a lot to Mike Natelli, aka Stars and Strikes. We'll be back with him next week. Talk about even more guys we could potentially trade, and then also get into what the Nats did in the draft and talk about some of the prospects they've brought into the system. Is obviously that play a role in how they shape the team going forward, with this deadline just being a small part of it. As always, please support nats.talkdcsports.com. Please support shopolddc.com. They keep the lights on this podcast, keep us coming to you every week. It's going to be an interesting weekend at Nats Park. A really big series against Arizona. You wonder if the bullpen is going to rear its ugly head. It has in the other two big series against Philly and the Yankees here at home. You hope that maybe this is the weekend it doesn't, but we shall see. Will be must-see TV. And like I said, hey, it's been 6-7 years in the wilderness here. We have a team potentially could make the playoffs, and we don't even know if there's going to be a baseball season next year, if we're being honest. So, Nats fans, take a moment, smell the roses. If you can make it to the park in the next week or two, please do. Enjoy the fact we have a contending team, and until next Friday, go Nats.